Welcome, everyone. This is an exciting panel to think about underrepresented students and getting diversity into the project of data science, which I think is underlying the Berkeley Data 8 project, underlying the sort of idea for this workshop overall is trying to spread it to as many institutions as possible and not just have it be like an R1 research institution project, but make sure that there's an open stack of resources that's widely shared. Today's panel will be chaired by Claudia von Vacano, who is the director of the D-Lab. She is a co-PI on the NSF Improving Undergraduate STEM Education grant that is the people on this panel. Claudia has worked on a hate speech project. She's worked on developing the digital humanities minor. She developed a lot of work for Sage Campus Online, and she has kept the visibility of keeping underrepresented students on the Berkeley campus as part of the data science project. Quickly, Aaron, can you mute your video? I'm going to turn it over to you, Claudia.
Okay, thanks so much, Eric. Thank you so much for all the panelists that are joining us today. I'm going to be doing an introduction of each panelist. But first, some of my responsibilities as moderator include asking everyone to please mute their microphones and their video if you're not presenting or speaking. So of course, our presenters are going to have their video and their audio on. There's going to be probably disturbances in the background, etc. So we want to avoid that. We also want to let you know that we would love to receive your questions in the chat box, and also when appropriate, you can raise your hand, and please wait for me to call on you so that we can have a constructive and organized discussion. And then, yeah, let's just try to respect each other's turns and follow the workshop code of conduct. We want to build on each other's ideas, and we want to be constructive, and we want to move forward. So let people's ideas enter their space, and let's give respect to differing ideas at the same time without necessarily contradicting each other. Yeah, so I think that in order to not clutter the chat, we ask that don't continuously follow up with unique situation questions in the chat. And reach out to the panelists or moderator outside of this call for more unique situation type questions. Yeah, so I think that I just want to say we of course value everyone's participation, each member of the community. We really value the fact that you're here, and we're particularly glad to have folks from historically Black colleges on the call, and Hispanic serving universities on the call. So we encourage particularly diverse voices. So if you normally speak a lot and don't represent diversity, you might want to think about stepping back. And if you normally don't find yourself speaking, maybe we encourage you to ask questions and make comments. So I think that those are my responsibilities in terms of setting the stage for the way that we're going to be interacting today. Thank you so much, Eric, for your kind words about my contributions and my commitment, more importantly, and my organization's commitment, D-Lab, to equity and inclusion and diversity. And today we're going to start, if I'm not mistaken, with David Harding. Professor Harding is a professor from sociology. He is the D-Lab faculty director, so I've had the privilege and the pleasure of working very closely with him in the last few years, and have observed his amazing commitment, knowledge, and expertise as it has to do with equity and issues of inequality in his own research. He is also PI on the, of course, the NSF IUSE project, and he's going to be giving an overview of that project. So I will let him go ahead and explain what the model is and the cycle of innovation. So I'll turn it over to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you, Claudia, for that warm introduction, and thanks everyone for joining the panel. I'm going to get my slides going here, but let me just say at the beginning that as was said a couple of times, a big part of what we're trying to do with this project is to enable and facilitate the expansion of these resources in this education model to other institutions. So one of my goals with this is to hear from everybody in the audience about how they see this fitting at their institution or not, and what changes we'd have to make. And I think that's what Maia, Averett, and Vandana and Janeja are also going to be talking about with their institutions. So let's see if I can. All right, it was just slow. Okay.
Yeah.
So switch. Okay. So the larger project at scale, it's an NSF funded project through the Improving Undergraduate STEM Education program at NSF. And the other folks, Claudia is deeply involved. The other folks who are involved are our Vice Chancellor for Undergraduate Education, Kathy Koshland, Rudy Mendoza-Denton from Psychology, David Culler from EECS, and Catherine Carson from History and the Data Science Education Program and the Data Science Division. And this is really a partnership between the D-Lab and the Data Science Education Program, and also with UMBC and Vandana and Mills College, and Maia, Averett, and Elizabeth Wade there, who you'll hear more from separately. So just an overview. I'll talk a little bit about the project motivation and the goals, and present the quote-unquote Berkeley model, so we have some context for the rest of the discussion. And then I'll spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the strategies and practices that are part of the Berkeley model that are around diversity and inclusion. So we have some background on what that's supposed to be. So as I'm sure we all know, because we're here at this panel and at this conference, that there's increasing interest in data science and data science education. Students learn these things, faculty are excited about it, but we're in a time of very limited resources for new faculty, development of new resources, of teaching assistants and things like that. And so there's a question of how do we scale, and that's one of the problems that the model tries to solve. We're also at this stage in data science that some are calling the formation of a new STEM field. And the question that raises for us is whether we can avoid making the mistakes of past STEM fields with regard to diversity and inclusion, whether we can start this new endeavor with diversity and inclusion sort of built in to the educational model. And so the Berkeley model has become and so we're going to talk about its the project is about its effectiveness, scale, and its dissemination. And I'll say a little bit more about the model itself in a minute. The goals of the project are to do what NSF calls a cycle of innovation. And so what that means is starting by evaluating and then refining and then disseminating. And then in our case, that dissemination, particularly to Mills and UMBC, will result in greater refinement and elaboration of the model. And then that's the kind of cycle. When we talk about scale here, we mean scale on 3 dimensions. One is just the size, serving more students. Scale in terms of who we're serving, the issue of inclusion, and then scaling to other institutions. And as I said, this is a close partnership with Mills and UMBC as they work on adopting the model and adapting the model to their context and seeing what we can learn from that. Okay, so what's the model? This is a kind of diagram from the student's perspective of the model today, and what outcomes do we hope to accomplish for students. One thing to note that this is really a model that's about the lower division, as we call it at Berkeley. So, you know, courses that are really designed, programs that are designed for first and second year students. So the major, you know, would be off to the side, or the minor as coming after this potentially for some subset of the students who do this. And so this is our attempt to kind of formalize in a diagram what the current curriculum and practice look like at Berkeley, and of course whether this aspect of it needs to be changed is precisely the point of the project. So the open, or the open boxes and circles are the actual program components, and the shaded parts are kind of the outcomes. So there's a set of intermediate outcomes around science identity, developing a growth mindset, developing intellectual community, developing students' science capital, getting them engaged and thinking of themselves as scientists or as data scientists. Because we're talking about diversity and inclusion and are very concerned about that, a big piece of the beginning of the model is actually outreach. So what are the strategies we can use to bring more students and a more diverse set of students into data science? And I'll say a little bit more about that in a few slides. The core of the curriculum at the lower division is the foundations course, which if you've been here at the conference for the last few days, you've heard a lot about. Another key part is Data Scholars, which is a support program for first-gen students and students of color who are in Data 8, and then connector courses, which link the material in Data 8 to substantive domains. And those are an also important part because we think that's the way that, one of the ways that students who wouldn't necessarily think of themselves as interested in data science can get connected to data science. And then as students go on in the program, they go on to what we call this consolidation and application phase, where maybe they're taking more advanced courses. Maybe they're engaged in projects through the Discovery Research Program or through a continuation of the Data Scholars Program. And then they can also go on to play a role in the instruction itself, either through teaching or through the development of pedagogical or curricular materials. And so part of the idea here is to have a kind of virtuous cycle where a set of students goes through and they come to the point where they can be doing teaching and developing pedagogical materials that then feeds back into the beginning of the model and encourages more students to get involved. One of the big open questions here, and one of the things you see missing from this diagram, is the role of faculty training, which is something we could perhaps come back to so sort of, I guess, another outline of the rest of the things that I'd like to talk about. And these are the various ways that the program engages with and supports all students with the goal of diversifying data science. So outreach, the set of pedagogical practices that are used, the support structures, and then instructor training. So outreach, what sort of things do we do to bring students in to the data science curriculum? One of the ideas we're working with in the project is to bring data science to the students who are usually underrepresented, and saying like, oh, look over here, this is something that you should be interested in, come to us, bring the data science to them and connect it to their intellectual motivations, their social problem or policy orientations, to have this sort of social, what we call social impact motivation, to show them that these set of tools and ideas and methods and concepts can help them do the work that they already want to do and explore the areas of intellectual inquiry that they were already excited to do. One way to do that is to introduce them to that in what are called modules at Berkeley. So that's where one two or some products usually, whether it's in cognitive science or history or psychology or sociology or physics or biology. It gives them a taste of data science and coding and so on. And then we're also directly involving undergraduates themselves in these efforts, and we've constituted an undergraduate advisory board made up of a diverse set of students who are making outreach plans to reach out to students in orientations and student organizations on campus. And they're also providing us kind of ongoing feedback about the rest of the work we're doing in the project and ways we can improve it. In terms of pedagogical strategies, these are the strategies that we know from STEM education tend to work for engaging a broad set of students and making them successful. Team-based learning, near-peer instruction, which in this lab instructors in the foundations course, for example, our connector systems or the connector courses, building in a lot of active learning, flipping the classroom, those kind of things, and then doing the work that it takes to build an intellectual community around their intellectual interests. In terms of support structures, the big one at Berkeley is a program we call Data Scholars. It's a 3-semester sequence where the first semester, when they're in the foundations course in Data 8, they're in a special lab section for the Data Scholars students. The next semester is focused on what is called pathways, so mentoring students see the various ways in which they can use data science, looking at career pathways, course pathways through the data science program, and how to marry that with their own other intellectual and substantive interests. And then the third semester, which is research participation, which is called discovery. And so the goals there are to provide learning support, to build community, and to help students see themselves as data scientists and get them involved in actually doing research and generating knowledge and applying what they've learned. There's a wider set of discovery projects, and then there's also the Data Peers consulting program where students help one another. And then the last component is instructor training. Most of what we have to talk about here so far is training undergraduate instructors who run the labs, who do tutoring and consulting and do the pedagogical development, developing notebooks and other course materials. They all take a required pedagogy course, which is a mix of how to teach various pedagogy and things like that. In terms of faculty, I guess the conference that you're at is one of the main ways in which there's faculty training. But there's sort of, I think, one of the things we're realizing as we're doing the project is that there's more to be discussed and learned around those issues and how to get faculty engaged in the training it takes to create welcoming and diverse classroom environments with the material that's being taught here. And then finally, I just want to give folks an update just so you have some context for what we're doing. We're not even through the first year of the project. So far we've piloted the new Data Science for Social Impact course, which is designed to have this social impact motivation to draw more students in. UMBC has just piloted its version of the Foundations course, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that from Vandana in a moment. We're in the process of doing a lot more in-depth documentation of the various program components so that we can understand how they fit together and how they all work, and also so eventually that others can take that documentation. For the evaluation part, we've been collecting survey and administrative data, and we've been working with the Undergraduate Advisory Board in outreach planning. So that's just to give you a sense of where we are in the project. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to the next speaker.
Great. Thanks so much, Dave. I wanted to just say that there were a few questions that came in, and they were really some wonderful answers from Catherine Carson and others. But we can return to these topics as well, just so that we note that they're of importance to the participants, which are issues related to the precursors to Data 8, in terms of coursework is one area of interest. Another area of interest has to do with the difference between social data science rather than simply data science, and putting social scientific theory and methods at the forefront and having data science be at the service of research and social science. And then there's questions regarding data peers and the structures around data peers. So we can come back to these. But next, I want to present Vandana Janeja. She's a professor and interim chair of the Department of Information Systems at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She's a member of the Advanced Executive Committee focusing on diversity and STEM there. And she's also serving as an intermittent expert at the NSF, supporting data science activities in the SCIES Directorate. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to be working with Professor Janeja this past year, as we have been collaborating quite closely with her and hearing about her experiences. So we're really looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks so much, Claudia, for that kind introduction. Let me share my slides as I start speaking through some of these things. Do you guys see?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. Let me just get the slide going. Okay, so thanks again for the nice introduction. And I don't know if you see my presentation mode or you see the presentation mode, right?
Yes, it's perfect.
Great, wonderful. So thanks again for the introduction, and I would just give a little bit of background, and I would also say that because of my affiliation with NSF, all views here are my own and reflect my observation in the project. So just keep that in mind. And I'll give you a little bit of context of UMBC before I jump into my role in the project itself. So University of Maryland, Baltimore County, as some of you may know, is really well known in the space of inclusive excellence and prides on the diversity of the campus with a very vast minority enrollment. It's a minority serving institute. There's a lot of emphasis on student success. There's a whole division dedicated towards looking at student success metrics and how we can help them succeed. There are very well-established and respected programs on campus. It's again has a big impact in the region and across the global social and economic impact. It's been ranked highly. So those are some of the things that I think are unique at UMBC and which are important to have that context for this particular model being established at UMBC. For the IS department, the Information Systems Department itself, which I chair right now, we have over 1,500 students, 1,200 of them are undergrads. We have 8 degrees varying from human-centered computing, information systems, business technology administration, health IT, both at master's and PhD level degrees and undergrad degrees. And we have several certifications and tracks. And I was coming into this project with a history in just establishing a cybersecurity data analytics certificate. And again, cybersecurity data analytics is a space where there is a lot of complexity and people worry taking on careers in that area. And we had experimented with the model of peer mentoring, where we found great success, where candidates coming from diverse backgrounds were really encouraged to take on careers in cybersecurity and data analytics. So that was some of the history that I wanted to sort of bring in here as well. So looking at establishing the foundations of data science and really the Data 8 model at UMBC, we started by first looking at the Data 8 course itself and how we could adapt it at UMBC. Of course, the scales are very different, the types of institutions are very different, but there were some other very fundamental constraints or considerations that we had to take into account. And I remember having this discussion with Claudia and David and telling them, I really think of this as a dry run. I don't know how it'll fly or how much it'll fly, but I'm glad that we pushed through for the spring course, despite it being just ramping up of the project. So we had sort of a discussion at UMBC about the number of credits that make sense for us, contact hours that make sense for us, what will be the prerequisites and so on. And Data 8, as you may know, is no prerequisite course, just the basic prep that's required. The same way we wanted to maintain the model and have 0 prerequisites so that any major could take that course. Number of credits, we decided to stay at 3 credits, and our contact hour was about 2 hours 15 minutes per week, which is slightly different from the Data 8 model, if you see, especially if you're trying to align the course materials exactly. So those were some things we had to keep in mind. And then I think the biggest piece for us was the institutional framework. What is the student body? What is their background? How many hours they can dedicate to studying per week? What additional workload balances, things that they might have to balance and so on. So those were all things we had to keep in mind in adapting this to UMBC. So the first course, we offered it as a special topics, and it got recently approved as a regular course. It's the Foundations of Data Science. In the spring semester, I was hesitating to open it all across campus. So we opened it within the college and really within the department, because within the department itself, we have so many majors. And we had 3 different majors register right away. So we had information systems, computer science, and business technology administration. And they're all 3 very different groups of students. Computer science students are very much geared towards programming, developing of systems. IS students are also quite well versed with programming, but at the same time, they look at organizational aspect, they look at human aspects. Business technology administration majors are not so much heavily oriented towards programming, but they're more interested in the business aspects of the technology. So again, slightly different populations, and especially from a programming perspective, quite different especially from the BTA perspective. It was a very small class the first time around, 10 students. And that made it a lot more easier to experiment with things. And that's one of the reasons I felt this was a nice thing to dry run, because we could experiment and play with switching homeworks or switching projects, especially as the semester changed after March. Another important consideration was deciding where it will fit in the curriculum, or where this course will fit in the curriculum. I remember having this conversation again with folks at Berkeley, that students are very, very particular about how much or how many courses they have to take. Are these additional courses not required for the major? Where do they fit in? Is it a prerequisite for something, or will it fill some requirements? So that was another sort of push and pull we had to do, and now it's going to be used for many different requirements in our major, so that helps students as well to take this on. Otherwise, it's one more course that they have to pay for, or they have to take from their tight scheduling. We really, at least from my perspective, I really tried to stay very close to the Berkeley Data 8 class structure and the syllabus. I really liked how all the labs were set up, all the, the book was set up. So I really tried to stick along with the material there. There were some variations that I adapted. There were some new homeworks. There were 2 different projects and an ethics module that I'm really partial to, that I really like to talk about in all my data science classes. So I made sure that it was included there. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So the new homework specifically, right when COVID started happening, I wanted to adapt the class a little bit to the homeworks, to what students were hearing. Everybody was stressed out in the March timeframe. So there was some switch around that I did. I had students look at case studies, look at what was the type of research being done with data, what was working, what was not working. Then I also modified one particular lab, which was either a regression lab or a classification lab, and they just had to use their own data. They could take the same lab that we were doing in the class, but they had to apply it to their own data. This was specifically because I found in seeing the labs that the students were able to do the labs step by step, but I was not sure if they would be able to adapt their own ideas to a data science question that they were trying to solve. So this was a step towards that can you take an existing lab and just switch the data and see how you can run it. And this actually culminated into another project that I had them do. So the last project of the semester, I switched that around too, where they sort of built on that lab. And now they had to take the case studies they looked at, take the lab that they ran, and now answer questions for a new case study that they themselves wanted to explore. So it kind of built towards that as a final project where they investigated a research question with their own or real world data. So this became very interesting where all of the data around COVID was coming out, and the students started looking at that data and exploring in their own labs and finding interesting correlations or regression analyses and so on. Another different project that I added in here was a tool exploration project. This also originated from the idea that there were students coming from very different backgrounds, very different interest areas, very different diverse mindsets. And I wanted them to have sort of an open mind to what they can do with data science. So I gave them a free form project where they could pick any data science tool and sort of explore it and see what are the possibilities. So this again sort of opened up their mind a little bit, and they explored tools like RapidMiner, Orange. There were two different groups or two different students. One worked on Google Cloud Computing, another worked on Amazon Web Services. So the class got to see these different myriad solutions that are out there for data science. The last thing that I added was the ethics module. I've talked to many people, Catherine as well, and others about the importance of ethics in data science. So I made sure to have a module on ethics, including a guest lecture. There were reading materials. There were surveys around what their thinking is about ethics. And in the works, what I have right now is students developing Jupyter notebooks for labs on ethics problems. So for example, if you are making decision choices about what your thresholds are in clustering or your k-nearest neighbor, how do you pick those, keeping ethical constraints in mind? So that's something in the works. And I hope I'm doing okay on time, Claudia. I'll try to wrap up quickly. There's some other experiences in Outlook that I'd just like to share quickly. The Jupyter Notebook infrastructure, we had a little bit of ramp up time for it. And different places have different infrastructure setting. Our Do It folks have been very proactive in setting that up with us. There were some issues we had in authentication, which we worked out. But we're also exploring if Google Colab could be a sort of a free platform that students could use. So that's something that I want to explore and see if folks at Berkeley have had experience with. If, let's say, a university has time to ramp up to Jupyter Notebook, could they experiment with Google Colab? So I'm trying to run all the labs on Google Colab and see if that works. So really the trick there is getting the right expertise at the right time and the right amount of time that you need from these experts. Another thing where I felt a lot more could be done is having solutions for labs and projects, because that may take some time to ramp up if you have all the labs, and if you don't have all the right solutions, you might have to solve some of these things, and you might have different interpretations in some places, or students might have different interpretations. So it's almost like there's a book and you need a good standardized solution set for the labs and projects. Auto grading, I know there was OKPy that was used before in Data 8, and now auto grading is being adapted. So we are trying to test that out as well to see how we can use that. Luckily, it was a small class, so I was able to experiment with different things. I also tried to emphasize more on the data science intensive elements, so more on the classification, more on the regression, k-nearest neighbor type of things, because I wanted to bring out more of the data science flavor. And again, adapting those homeworks and projects, because I could see that there are students who have different backgrounds, different interests, and some were able to do the structured projects very well. Others did really well in the open-ended projects, but just getting different flavors in the classroom. We are trying to ramp up efforts with modules and connectors. And I like to say I would love to learn from Berkeley once upon a time when this thing ramped up at Berkeley. What was the experience? I've had good conversations around that, but that's something that we are learning as we go. So we recently had a meeting where Claudia and David kindly joined us with folks from physics, mechanical engineering, IS department, and we are also having conversations with chemical, biochemical engineering, and others around campus to see if they would like to start modules and connectors. There's also this partnership called Greater Washington Partnership in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. It's a consortium of companies, and they sort of create these badges. And now the course that we have accounts for one of these badges, which is sort of a programming requirement for our BTA major and also for data science. So that's also helping us in that sense. We are also thinking of adding the data science course as a first course for a business technology administration or business analytics track. In this meeting with the other faculty members, we also had a conversation of how could we adapt this to a grad, intro course in data science to standardize things, because we have so many different data science grad courses. How could we standardize that? So that's something interesting that we would like to look at. And also the geospatial analysis came up in this meeting. People were interested in seeing how we could adapt it to other types of areas. So we are learning from this experience and trying to adapt to our grad tracks as well, which is very interesting. And one interesting thing that we're trying to see is how can we help our students with existing structure? So we have something called the Center for Women in Technology, which is a very nice cohort-based model, a practicum, which has a lot of support systems for mentoring diverse students, populations, and so on. And we are thinking of leveraging that structure for our data scholars. So we fund these undergrad students, but then they are part of the CVIT cohort, so they get that momentum with them and mentoring with them. And we're also thinking carefully about sort of a pre-data science prep class, if needed, which came up in the earlier discussion with David as well. So lots of different pieces, and I'll stop there and see if I can pass it on back to Claudia and have questions later on. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. Yeah, so we're going to keep moving forward here. There's not too many new questions right now, so I encourage all of you to please do generate your questions and comments. We're going to have plenty of time for lots of conversation, about probably a little bit more than 30 minutes of conversation. So we're really looking forward. I have some questions, of course, prepared. Perfect. So I was going to have to say. So next we have Maia Averett. And she joined the faculty at Mills College in 2008 after earning her PhD in mathematics from the University of California, San Diego. And she's an active advocate for women and underrepresented groups in mathematics, and finds value in projects that increase mathematical accessibility. So we're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. All right, let me see if I can get my slides going now. Desktop. Can you see my desktop?
Yes.
Okay. Does that work? Can you now see my presentation?
It's perfect.
All right, great. So my name's Maia Averett. I'm associate professor of mathematics at Mills College. And as David mentioned, we are working together with Berkeley on the project. We're in a very different stage from UBC or UMBC that you just heard from. So I want to talk to you a little bit about our project. I'm sorry, my dog is right here. She's bothering me. So I want to talk a little bit first about me, so you have some context about where I'm coming from, and then tell you a little bit about Mills so that you have some context about what type of school we are. And then I'm going to talk about data science at Mills. Two things I'm going to talk about. First is the development and the structure of our program, and then some of the challenges, strategies, and opportunities, and what we're hoping to get out of the work that we're doing with UC Berkeley on this NSF grant. So about me, I am not a data scientist by training. I'm a very pure mathematician. As you might be able to tell by my slides, a pure mathematician made in Beamer. I studied homotopy theory for my PhD. I came to Mills specifically to work on bringing women and underrepresented groups into mathematics. Yeah, my experience as a woman in mathematics, going through PhD programs was, it was rocky, and I wanted to kind of do some work to help increase representation and so to work on increasing diversity in mathematics. I started to get interested in data science after being at Mills for a few years and realizing that homotopy theory is not really a thing that you can do much with undergraduates. The training that they need in order to do research is harder. And then I was thinking a little bit about the majors that we were graduating, what they were going on to do. And I also, on the research side, started to get interested in data science because I learned about topological data analysis, which connected what I was doing to some sort of concrete data analysis types of problems. And I thought that I could help Mills and help women in mathematics and STEM in general by bringing data science to Mills. That would help our increase diversity in data science, because as you'll see, you'll learn about Mills, and it would provide some really good job opportunities for our students. That's what I just said. And so I developed the data science program at Mills starting in 2015. And right around that time, basically right at the end of when we had gotten our program approved at Mills, I was part of a group at PCMI, that's the Park City Mathematics Institute that happens every summer. In 2016, the topic was data science, and we worked with Dick DeVoe and a whole big group of mathematicians and computer science people from around the country to create a curriculum for undergraduate data science education, because there's this need, because this is such a new field. It's kind of like the Wild West. You want to do something in a structured way, and everyone has a lot of different ideas, and there aren't really standards yet. And so that's what that group worked on. So a little bit about Mills, just for context. It's a women's college. If you didn't know that, it was founded in 1852. I guess I didn't say this here, but it's in Oakland, California, about 15 minutes from UC Berkeley campus. We're really tiny. We have about 750 undergraduate students and 400 graduate students. We're a Hispanic serving institution. So what that means is that I forget the exact threshold, but maybe 28%, I think, is the cutoff of our students are Hispanic or Latina. We actually have 63% students of color, and 43% of our students are first generation. So 58% of them are LGBTQ+, and 55% are Pell Grant eligible, which means they're low income. So you can see from this population that this is, if we can create pathways for our students into data science, we'll be doing a lot for increasing diversity in the field. I should also say that being a women's college, we basically accept everyone except for cis men. So we're the first college to have an official transgender policy. And it's a really sort of supportive, equitable type of environment where students can really explore a lot about themselves. So we tend to get a lot of students who are very interested in social justice and that kind of aspect, just because of the nature of the type of institution that we are. All right, so developing data science at Mills. So because of the type of institution that we are, so I'm going to speak to this a lot as my process in developing the data science major. Unfortunately, due to some staffing changes and resource issues, I have actually not had the opportunity to teach any of the data science courses at Mills because I'm really needed on the math side, the lone remaining mathematician at Mills at the moment. So unfortunately, that's, I'll talk about the development of this, but I can't really speak too much about the details of what's actually happened in the classroom. So data science at Mills, development and structure. I started this process in 2015. I wanted to bring data science to Mills for reasons that I've already touched on. And when you're developing a program at a small place like Mills, it's kind of like there's usually one person or maybe a team of people who has an idea and a motivation, but then you want to get broader support, especially from people in sort of neighboring fields. So I reached out to a lot of people across campus looking for collaborations across departments about people who might be interested in working with me on this. And the goal was really to build a sort of robust and flexible program that has minimal new FTE requirements, because as as I've kind of mentioned, we are very tiny and we need for a lot of our courses and our faculty to have sort of be multi-purpose. You can see that already in the department that I'm in, which is the Mathematics and Computer Science department. It's one department, and now it houses data science as well. So I really needed to create a program that wasn't going to just be, 15 new courses completely, but what are the resources that we already have on hand, and sort of sticking those together into a thing that made sense as data science. So what I ended up with in collaboration with people around campus is this is pretty similar to what we ended up talking about at PCMI also with the curricular standards. We kind of have foundational courses and then a data science core and then tracks that happen sort of along the way and after the data science core. So in the foundations, there's 5 courses, 22 credits. It's, your basic stuff that you would expect: calculus, linear algebra, programming. And then there's a data science core, which has got data analysis, data visualization, probability statistics, and modeling in it. And then there's individual tracks that sort of focus on the student's interest. We have one that's more mathy, one that's more computer sciencey, one that's more economics, and one that is social science. And I'll talk about, there's some problems with this that I hope to solve, but this curriculum that we ended up developing is pretty similar to what we ended up developing in this PCMI group. And by the way, if you're interested in looking at that paper with the guidelines, it's in the Annual Review of Statistics and Application in 2017. And it's called, what's on the slides here. The slides will be shared also, so you can look that up. So what are the challenges? Well, Mills is tiny. We have tiny faculty. We have few students. So one of the things that is challenging is limited resources. So what can we do to sort of solve or remedy our limited resources? We have to make our courses sort of multi-purpose. A lot of times we leverage independent studies. If we don't have quite enough students to make a full course go, then we can do it with independent studies. And then we also have a lot of student workers. The student workers are all undergraduates. We don't have any graduate programs in data science or math. We do have computer science. So sometimes those students help, but our student workers are really, really crucial for us, and they play a really, it's an important role for their education as well as for the education, like sort of mentorship and keeping that cycle going like David was talking about. This is something we've done at Mills for years and years in math. The good things about having undergraduates as your student workers are that you're taking a burden of having a job of a student off of, like, they don't have to work at Ross Dress for Less or the local Safeway. They can, work on campus. They can get paid for that. They can get work study. And they're at the same time developing their skills. They're getting sort of career relevant training. And and then they're really good mentors for the younger students or earlier on students. Another major problem that we have at Mills, or challenge, I should say, is student preparedness. And this is something that is really a moving target. In the time since I've been at Mills, we've gone from having, pretty strong mathematical backgrounds of our students that are coming in their first years to that when we went SAT optional, it kind of had a big impact on the sort of STEM preparation of a lot of our students. And we've had a shift where now we have, increasing number of students that need pre-calculus before calculus, as opposed to before it was more students coming directly into calculus and fewer in pre-calculus. So student preparedness is a really big piece for us, because it's hard to make a robust data science program if your students are having trouble with some of the foundational aspects of math and computer science. So some of the ways we get around that or remedy that are with peer tutoring. That's what we call it. I think we developed this maybe 8 or so years ago at Mills. This is across campus. It's not only in mathematics and computer science that we do this, but in English. And if you're a faculty member teaching a course, you can nominate peer tutors for your course, who are typically students who have taken that course before or are majors in that field. And then the students who are enrolled in your course can go to this Center for Academic Excellence and sign up for individual appointments, and it's free for them. And this is still part of that mentorship and sort of cycle of giving training to the students who are farther in the program at the same time as you are helping generate more students by having more role models and having this sort of cyclical effect. Another thing we've experimented with, which it varies depending on the course, is sort of these just-in-time workshops. I'll speak to this in calculus. Calculus is 5 credits at Mills, and we try to make it so that means it meets 5 hours per week, 5 50-minute sessions. And we structure it so that it has 2 sort of recitation sections, but they're not really recitation sections. We call them workshops. Sometimes it's about going more in depth with examples, but often it's about reintroducing the concepts that the students are supposed to know from pre-calculus at the time when they need it for calculus, right? So right before we start talking about exponential functions or something like that, we revisit, log rules and exponential functions and all of those things, that the stuff that they're supposed to know from pre-calculus. So it's kind of like reminding you of the prerequisite material right as you're about to need it in the main part of the class. And that's really helpful. There's some issues with it, of course, but it does a good job of filling in those gaps. And then also sending students to extra online modules or resources, which is that has a really varying, it really depends on the student, whether they are able to learn from, data camp or something like that, some kind of sort of just online resource where it's more independent. I think one of the reckonings that data science in general is going to have to deal with is scaling things is hard, and students, the best way to get the students that you need is you have to put resources into this. You can't, a lot of students need, smaller classes, more individualized instruction. And if we really are serious about increasing diversity in data science and mathematics, we have to be serious about allocating resources to that too. We can't just say, here's a magic online module that you can do that will work for everyone, because it tends to be the students who are already ready who can learn that way. Soapbox, I'm getting off my soapbox now. So another challenge that we have is student interest. So a lot of students don't come to Mills thinking that STEM at all is even for them. They don't see them, they've never been taught that, they've never been shown really good role models for people who look like them, or they don't think of themselves as someone who does computer science or data science or math. Typically what happens with a lot of our students is they come and they just end up in their first year in calculus or in a good computer programming introductory class, and they have really amazing instruction and sort of personalized attention, and they're shown role models who look like them and act like them, and they see that, oh, actually this is the thing that's for me. And so that's, one way that we get student interest is sort of just this accidental way, but we really want to start to be more purposeful with that. I mean, that's kind of like an accidental, whoever lands in calculus ends up maybe becoming a math or data science major. So we need to do more outreach to our incoming students. And this has to start also, I think, talking to ways of doing this in high schools already is super important too, to get students to think about that before they're even going to college. And then this partnership with UC Berkeley, one of the big things that I want to see out of it is increasing student interest and student access to students who aren't traditionally just ready to go right into calculus. So is that, yeah, okay. So where we are in the project with UC Berkeley is pretty much the very beginning. We haven't piloted our Data 8 program or our Data 8 course at all. I think that's happening in the fall. I'm not actually the person working on that. I don't know if my colleagues are in the audience today, if they can speak to that. But we're sort of just getting going with this project. And so it's really interesting to learn from, the previous experiences, and we're excited to move forward. So thanks for listening to me. There's my contact information if you have any questions. And then, of course, here's that paper that I mentioned. So let me stop sharing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Do I push this button? All right.
Wonderful. So I'm going to now invite the other panelists to come back, to turn their video on and come back to the table, the virtual table here. Everything's virtual these days. I don't know about you, but it's driving me crazy. And, yeah, so what a wonderful set of experiences and thoughts and investment in this space. Thank you each for your valuable insights. So I have prepared a few questions, and as we start to have conversation, and I trust that the audience out there is going to have follow-up questions and raise their hands and engage with us, because I think that's what makes these events fun is to really get to hear from everybody out there as well. So there's kind of about 4 areas of thinking that I've been doing around this. And I'll start with professional development of faculty and instructors in general, whether they're lecturers or student instructors. In discussions with both the External Review Board, the NSF IUSE here, UC Berkeley, as well as with co-PI Rudy Mendoza, professional development of professors and also of student instructors and lecturers, etc., is an essential next step for making data science more accessible. How do you get buy-in from faculty in terms of motivating and inspiring them to engage in, for example, anti-racist pedagogy or more inclusive pedagogy? I thought I would start with a hard question. Pulling no punches here. So anybody, I think, can start.
I guess I can jump in real quick because it's on my mind a lot and having conversations about modules and connectors, you know. I think you had a very interesting element to it, that how do you get this buy-in to have people think. And one of the biggest things that I've realized is as simple as conversations, but as hard as conversations. It sounds easy, but sometimes conversations are the hardest, and especially across majors. In this environment of enrollments, you want to have a very healthy conversation about the topics that you want to include, the intersections you want to have between majors. So I'll just simply say as easy as conversation, as hard as conversations. And I can come back after I hear other thoughts.
I'll say something. I think institutional culture is really important, and this is something that leadership can model. You know, Mills prides itself as being like a social justice-y kind of forward-thinking place, but it's still at Mills we have problems with this. You know, faculty have a tendency to, you know, we think that we know everything, you know, and it's very hard for us to be humble. And I think really modeling, you know, admitting that you don't know, naming mistakes that you've made is super, super important to, you know, sort of make that normalized, you know, in the culture of your institution, so that people come to things with an open mind and with humility and with a sort of perspective of listening.
I guess I would say that this is the big question. If we're going to be successful in the long term, I agree with you 100%, Claudia. And I agree with what's been said so far. It's really not as simple as, oh, let's have some more social science examples, or examples about police violence, or examples about, you know, whatever. Because if you do those the wrong way, you can actually have the opposite effect, right? And so I think part of what we're trying to do in this project is to collect the data that will allow us to make a case to those faculty about what is and what is not working in their classrooms, to show the data scientists the data about their teaching, and what the student and whatever else, all the other things we can gather data on. And so obviously we have yet to analyze those data, so I don't have much more specific to say about it, but that's sort of ideally built into the process of the project.
I'll add one other thing, Claudia, if I can. I think one thing that came to mind is finding those students who sort of sit between majors sometimes is very helpful. Because if they are sort of the bridge between two faculty members, that creates very interesting projects and discussions around that. I had a student approach me about a cybersecurity project, and we ended up talking about how you can use data to lie. And she ended up picking up an independent study topic out of that. So I think students can be a bridge as well, especially if they're sitting between majors.
I love that. That's such a great point. And Dr. Melissa Ellen Coe was adding in the chat about aligning to institutional goals. And I think that is a really good point, is to think through what are the institutional goals, what are the departmental goals, and what are sort of the incentive structures in those places. I think that that's a brilliant comment also from the audience. So going along the line a little bit about I'll say Dave, because I work with him every day. Dr. Harding, Professor Harding, was just saying, how do you conduct ongoing needs assessment of diverse students, particularly if they're not necessarily aware of what resources exist or that they're particularly interested in data science?
So was that directed at my connection broke up there a minute. Could you say the question again, Claudia?
Oh, sure,
Sorry.
yes. My question is, how do you create an inclusive? Oh, sorry, that's the next one. How do you conduct ongoing needs assessment of diverse students, of the students' needs that are of those diverse students, particularly if they're not necessarily aware of what resources exist or are particularly interested in data science? So you want to learn something about them and their needs pertaining to data science. However, they may not even know that what data science is, or that they care about data science, but we want them to care about data science. So how, it's sort of a little bit of a catch-22 in my mind. How can we go about the process of learning what their needs are, and I guess also informing them in the process?
Well, I guess I'll start. I mean, I think this is where we really have to be building relationships with students, and listening to what they have to say and actively asking them about their experiences. I mean, I mostly do this more informally with undergraduates who are involved in my research group, or, I found talking to my connector assistant student when I was teaching a connector last semester just invaluable in understanding more about things from the student's perspective, what she would hear from the students, what her experiences were, just a year or two ago as she was developing her own skills. So, and I mean, the strengths of this model where we have so many undergraduates involved in the teaching is, if we do that right, then that's a way for that information about what's working and what's not, and who we're reaching and who we're not, and why, to filter back to us. And we've also tried to do that kind of explicitly in the project through this undergraduate advisory board, by actually recruiting students and paying them to be involved and do that work. But more generally, like, relying on the students and taking seriously what they.
I can perhaps add something, Claudia, there. I felt like having sort of an open-ended exercise, and even the open-ended tool exploration, I felt that brought home some of the exploratory aspects of data science to people, and students picked all kinds of data sets and data combinations. And I gave this one example to you guys once, a student looking at the COVID cases and taxes related to smoking. Really wild ideas, and they were just having fun with it, exploring different things. So I feel like having some open-ended things would at least pique their interest. That might be something worth thinking about.
I guess I'll just add one final thing. I guess there's different ways to interpret your question. One of the ways that I would interpret it is, how do we bring students to data science who haven't even thought about data science as being a thing for them? And I think that's a challenge we have a lot at Mills. And I think one thing that we haven't done very well at Mills, but that we could do, and that maybe other people can do, is assemble a bunch of examples of places in topics that students might be interested in, criminal justice reform, COVID cases, that are sort of short and easy to understand, and say, like, here's the role that data science actually plays in this. And if you want to do this, here's what you need to do. And that could be delivered to students in a lot of different ways. Like, you know, you can have little YouTube videos, or students get presentations, you know, I don't know, just any way that you can reach out to them, TikTok, I don't know, you know, but like showing how data science is actually connected to their field. Like, you have to meet them at a place that is something that they care about. And then they realize, oh, actually, I can leverage this super powerful tool to maybe even make more impact in this field that I care a lot about.
Great, thank you. A question came in from the audience. I'm gonna not do a great job of pronouncing the name. The first name I can say, Kate. Haritinova is asking, how do you support students who are struggling but are not reaching out for help? For example, first-generation students usually are in this group. Do you have specific examples that you can share?
So should I jump in? I didn't want to. So I'll jump in with one particular example. I think Claudia and David might remember this from my early discussions, but I had some students, at least one particular example that comes to mind. The student had no background in programming. They came to the class the first week. They loved the programming. They said, I love this. I love data science. And, you know, they breezed through the first lab and so on. But right around the second, third, you know, when the lab started getting progressively difficult, or the project, especially the first project, I could see that there was, you know, some push and pull. But the student did not want to reach out because they were taking ownership that this was the first time they were programming and they loved the programming. So it's a very difficult problem. I don't want to call it a problem, but it's a very difficult situation to reach out to the students, which is what I did in this case. And that's why I said the small class really helped, that I could have one-to-one connection with each and every student. I did have a part TA who was also helpful. We added more tutoring hours. And I specifically redirected the student. I gave them opportunities to submit something that they had missed, because I knew that they had a lot of stuff going on in terms of their athletics and other works. Especially with the first generation and other diverse backgrounds, there's a lot more on the plate that these students are dealing with. So the amount of time that they can devote may be also less. So really working one-to-one, redirecting them to tutors, maybe giving additional time. I know that can be frowned upon when you're giving additional time to a particular student. But I started doing that more and more, especially after the COVID shutdowns. So I think it's, especially if it becomes a very big class, like the current data 8 model, I don't know if that is scalable, but at this level, it was definitely scalable.
Maia, did you want to jump in?
I was going to say something, but
okay.
so I could wait till after you.
Go ahead. No,
okay.
Go ahead.
I have a similar, this is, you know, to get back on that soapbox, we have to invest resources if we want students who are struggling. We have to be able to find ways to make more time for them. You know, like if they have to work a second job, we have to maybe figure out how to have funding so that they don't have to do that. I think, you know, it's great to sort of imagine that there's some sort of magic that we can do, but really it's time, it's faculty time, it's noticing that your students are struggling, and then you can reach out to them if you have a small enough environment where you know them well. I often have this situation in my first year calculus class with students who are first generation. They don't know the norms. They're really out of their element. They can't ask their parents for advice on how to go. They are really scared to talk to a professor, you know, and that what they need to learn is this. Also, peer tutors come into this, or student worker mentors kind of come into this. They need to learn that it's okay to reach out for help. Your faculty member is there for you. You know, the whole reason I'm here is not to just blah blah into the atmosphere and not have anyone learn. You know, so creating a culture where students, you know, get over that initial hump of feeling comfortable about asking for things that they need. You know, that's a really important part of it. And then sometimes, you know, it's about figuring out what actually is the issue. You know, that's can be a big challenge, and that because it might be if the student a lot of times might not know what their problem is, what is the piece that's missing, and so that actually requires time and work and resources. I mean, not to harp on this, but like this is the most important thing, is that nothing is free. We can't just have this for free. We're going to have to dedicate time and resources to it.
Yeah, I guess I would, I do think this is critical, especially in these very large versions of the Foundations course of Data 8. To tell you a brief story, I was working with a group of sociology majors who I met in my sociology class, and they were all first-gen students of color. Many of them were formerly incarcerated, and we were starting to work on research projects related to the criminal justice system. And I started asking them, like, hey guys, have you thought taking the the data science class? And they just looked at me like I was crazy. And the reason wasn't necessarily because they didn't think it would be useful, but they imagined themselves in this environment where it was going to be very competitive, even though the Foundations course is has no prerequisites. You're not supposed to know anything more than algebra. You're not supposed to have any coding experience. You are going to be sitting next to somebody who went to coding camp all summer when they were in high school and breezed through big aspects of the course, and that can be very intimidating and make you feel like you don't belong. And so I think part of what it is sort of what Maia was just referring to is like creating a course environment in which there's a kind of communal aspect where we're all we're all in this together. We're all going to work on this together, right? It's really about the type of learning environment that the instructor creates, and what we've been calling kind of intellectual community. This is where the near peer instruction comes in, especially if we have students who are doing that, who have backgrounds and who have sort of traveled the same road as those students who are going to be less willing to ask for help in a different kind of environment. And just the instructor. I find that whenever you're teaching technical material, if you just remind the students that this material is hard, like if it was easy, you'd just watch a bunch of YouTube videos at home and be done and know it, right? But you're taking a class. It's not supposed to be easy. And it's okay to struggle a little bit. But you do have to have the resources for them to actually take advantage of to solve the problem as well.
Great. Yeah. You did a really great job of foreshadowing a question from Adele Cutler, which is, how do you get students to be more inclusive with each other? And I did want to also bring in a question that came in earlier that had to do with the data peer, since the peer-to-peer issue came up. And I think the resources are absolutely essential. One thing that I will add is that the D-Lab is working with the Data Science Education Program to develop a cascading mentorship structure where librarians and core staff and postdocs are working along with graduate students to mentor undergraduate data peers, so that there is a culture, and then we have a culture, it's okay not to know. It's a very inclusive culture. That's the ethos, and daily working against the bro culture, of the tech bro culture, because it's very powerful. And so having that culture, that learning community environment, I think has really helped us at UC Berkeley. It sounds like a similar thing is happening at Mills. Where that culture is being established. But I think that also that third space, right? Having a space where it's not just the classroom. One of my questions was going to be, what are the basics of an inclusive classroom? So I think it is a good moment to think about that. You've been talking about this, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to add in terms of what are the basics of inclusive classroom or inclusive pedagogy, and how do you build from there? I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add. I know, Dave, you did mention some ideas, but Maia and Vandana, I don't know if you wanted to add anything about above.
It's kind of like you set this tone on the first day of your class. You know, you really, and it has a lot to do with the way that you engage with your students and the way that you ask for students to participate and the way that you respond to their questions and those types of things. It can be really scary. I mean, I have a huge advantage of being in a women's college, honestly. Students at Mills, you know, I don't know, this is just part of the culture kind of, and it also helps to talk about it like that, just to say that this is how it is here. You know, you're just saying this is how it is here, is that this is the culture of the raised hand. You raise your hand to ask a question when you don't know something. You know, when I was a graduate student at UC San Diego and I was a TA, I would often get students raising their hand just to like try to show me that I was wrong. Like, oh, what about the empty set? You know, this kind of thing. You really have to kind of shut that type of culture down and just say, like, you know, and really encourage the types of questions of when you don't know, like, please stop me when you don't know, and then like doing active engaged learning where you're really kind of checking in with students and saying it's okay to say that you don't know, or they can ask a friend, you know, or they can say they don't want to talk right now. And it's really something that you set as far as tone, like right from the very beginning, and it's really hard to fix it if you've messed it up. So really being thoughtful about that on your first day of class, learning about your students on your first day of class. I mean, you're not going to get much done on your first day of class. You want to ask them what are their names and their pronouns. You want to find out where they're coming from. Why are they taking this class? Have a discussion that is around that community building, where then they feel like they are, you know, they're welcome. Their perspective is valued. They're more likely to trust you and say, you know, to admit when they don't understand things. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. I'll echo something that Maia said. It really starts on the first day of the class and really on your syllabus. So I have this statement on the diversity statement on respect and diversity statement on civic dialogue, which I spend a little bit of time in the first class itself. What is the expectation? Because we are going to be dealing with so many different types of data. And again, you can manipulate the data in so many different ways to present things that you want to present. And students really became keen on that, looking at those things. And also, you know, examples, I think Data 8 has these examples sprinkled throughout, like the Galton's example of prediction, the genetics example of prediction height of kids. You know, that led to a very interesting discussion around the topic. And the ethics discussion, I think, really helped too. When this was around the time discussions of COVID and contact tracing were taking place. So that led to a big discussion in the class when we had the ethics module. And that's why I think having almost a dedicated week about that is very helpful too. So students feel included and students feel that they can talk about these difficult topics, because honestly, in the classroom is where they would really talk about these and not on the job. And there were difficult conversations about, so if I'm on the job and I'm dealing with these type of decisions, or I have to make this choice, what do I do? So it kind of opens up those topics as well.
Yeah, I guess I would just add one more kind of anecdote. I guess I don't know how well this would work in a very large class, but in my smaller connector course, I actually used an hour of the class at the beginning of the semester to have a discussion with the students about what kind of classroom environment do you want to be in, and what is it going to take for us collectively to create that environment. And I said, you know, what guidelines should we create for ourselves? Because, you know, in this class we were working with data on, you know, neighborhoods and pollution and you know, police violence, and you know, we were working with all this data, and you know, we knew that sensitive topics were going to come up. And I was I didn't amazingly at it, and came up with a very reasonable set of guidelines. Now, I did get some in the course evaluations later. A few students said they thought that was a waste of time, and they didn't really say whether they thought, oh, of course we all know this, or this isn't worth, you know, this isn't important in the first place. But so I did get some pushback, but I think it was worth doing, and I think doing that signaled to a group of the students there that, you know, this was going to be a space that was going to be for them, and that where their perspectives and their voices would be respected.
That's great. So there's a couple. We have about 7 minutes left, and there's a couple, about 3 questions more. There's one question, one thing I did want to add is that I think that peer, that for scaling for larger classes, I think that peer structure that we were talking about earlier is going to be a really helpful component to multiply the impact of this. And so all the professional development for the student instructors is just as important, because their ability to navigate these conversations is very, is essential. So I think it's a very sensitive and difficult thing for students to do without proper support and oversight. There's a question about resource accessibility. Particularly now, I think this is something in the foreground of our minds, and I'm really proud that UC Berkeley has put something, a couple $1 million or something, a significant amount of money to purchase computers for students who don't have computers. So the question is, some students do not have a computer or a device, so they can't do their work at home. And so the question is, what do you do if students don't have access to a computer? How can you address this issue?
Buy them a computer.
Yeah.
Honestly, this is the thing. We have, if we want this, this is what we have to do.
I have to agree with you. There's not a lot of options, particularly now. The other thing that's equally important is Wi-Fi access, and buying Wi-Fi access, which is something you can actually do it's sort of in a modular, like a cell phone, like a throwaway cell phone type of way. So yes, I think universities are going to absolutely have to buy computers and buy Wi-Fi access. It's a fundamental accessibility issue. There's another question about what educational research is integrated into the IUSE grant. And so what's the kind of the backbone in terms of educational research that was used to guide the model of the grant? It's a multi-part question. There's another part that has to do with metrics for measuring outcomes in that grant. And then another part still that has to do with interdisciplinary learning, but perhaps the research and the metrics we can tackle first.
The way we put our proposal together was probably not the textbook way to do it. I'll admit that. We kind of had this. We looked at what was happening, and we looked at the research, and we looked at what was happening, and we tried to understand the links between them, and that's where that diagram that I put up kind of came from. And when we started looking at what was happening in Data 8 and the connectors and data scholars, we started to see that built into that were some of these core ideas that were showing up in the research: the team-based learning, the active learning, the near-peer instruction, the social impact. There was a little bit of research on that we could draw on. So those were some of the core things that were shown, along with the usual research about what are people's success probabilities and who's having more success. That's pretty straightforward from the research perspective of document. Those are well documented facts. In terms of the metrics, so we're kind of looking at both subjective and objective metrics. So the subjective ones are coming more from qualitative interviews we plan to do, which haven't been done yet, and surveys, which have been collected but not yet analyzed for the past semester. These things like, are we promoting science identity? All those concepts that were there, and people's feelings of inclusiveness in the classroom, feeling like they were respected by their peers, like they belong in the classroom. And then the more objective measures of, what more are people going on and taking more classes in this area, or even longer term things like, are they Are they staying enrolled in the university? Are they, what's their time to degree? And then what majors and minors are they picking and things like that, which we can see in the administrative data that we collect from the university.
So we only have 2 more minutes left. There's the ask. So in the last 2 minutes, I wonder if we can reflect on what the unique opportunity of data science is as opposed to traditional STEM disciplines. And that kind of goes along with this idea of what is the interdisciplinary nature of learning opportunity. So now we only have 1 minute. So in a couple of sentences, as we are closing, what are your kind of final thoughts regarding that, please?
Well, I'll say briefly, what's somewhat different about data science than some other STEM fields, not all, is the way it intersects with social sciences and the way we can use, social impact and social problems and social questions to motivate students who wouldn't naturally see themselves as data scientists.
I'll just quickly add that I think data science is such an essential topic for everyone to know. I joked with David the other day that I'm even teaching my middle schooler sometimes about data science. So I feel like it should be a really gen ed type requirement that's really helpful for people to address real societal issues as well in any major.
And I think I was going to say both those things, but maybe I'll say a third thing, which is that helping students understand that data literacy is actually is power, and that as you learn this, you are able to challenge political structures and systems of oppression and power, and you're able to see through ways that people are manipulating and abusing data. So the more you know about this, the more sort of personal power for advocacy that you have for yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. There was one question about ethics, and I just wanted to acknowledge that at UC Berkeley, I really love the fact that it was a question about who teaches ethics. And I love the fact that ethics is at the foreground of the UC Berkeley data science model. So hopefully the answer is everyone, and also that it's valued. And that we instill that value in students as well, and we don't diminish the value of that. Yeah, data science in the service of society. Thank you so much for this amazing, interesting presentations and discussion, and we really appreciate your time. And for everyone who participated, thank you for your engagement. I'll hand it over to Eric.
Thanks everybody for an awesome panel. I really appreciate it. So many great things, so many great challenges, so many great things to work on together. I really like having the Mills and the UMBC and the Berkeley together to just really think of like different ways this is getting carried out in different parts of the country. You can follow up in the chat. I guess people are probably still chatting stuff and talking about links and talking about references, and the tape of the call will be put up in a little bit. The slides will be shared in the files link in the general tab. Thanks, Claudia, for hosting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Maia.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.